Doctors with disabilities exist in small but measurable numbers. How did they navigate their journey? What were the challenges? What are the benefits to patients and to their peers? What can we learn from their experiences? My name is Lisa Meeks, and I'm thrilled to bring you the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Join me as I interview docs, nurses, psychologists, OTs, PTs, pharmacists, dentists, and the list goes on. I'll also be interviewing the researchers and policymakers that ensure medicine remains an equal opportunity profession.
Hello, and welcome back to the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Today, we bring you a continuation of our series on voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color with disabilities in medicine. These episodes amplify the voices of healthcare providers at the intersection of disability and BIPOC identity, enlightening our understanding of the challenges faced by marginalized populations. By elevating these stories and sharing these lived experiences, we hope to advance critical conversations about race and disability and facilitate a greater understanding of the challenges and benefits at the intersections. Funding for this project was provided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Together, we believe that a culture of health requires the dismantling of structural racism and ableism so that everyone has the chance to live a healthy life. Beyond highlighting the stories of individuals with disabilities who identify as BIPOC, we have also asked individuals from our original series to, as guest interviewers, take the lead in bringing out these narratives. It is important to our team that we elevate these stories in authentic ways, and that we place power in the form of the microphone in the hands of the guest interviewers and interviewees. You may notice far fewer narrations and transitions here than you would encounter in our other episodes. We hope that this structure supports the telling of our guests' stories that holds true to real lived experiences and perspectives. In today's episode, guest interviewer Dr. Justin Bullock, a nephrology fellow at the University of Washington School of Medicine, interviews Dr. Chase Anderson, an assistant professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at UC San Francisco. Friends and colleagues since college, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Bullock discuss how they hold their identities as Black, gay, public-facing figures in medicine, the forms that activism can take when complicated by one's marginalized identities, and how medical professions and mental health might be made more kindred spirits. A quick content warning. This episode contains discussion of violence against minorities, depression, and suicidality. We advise that you use discretion when listening. For any U.S. listeners, if you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts, the Suicide Crisis Lifeline can be reached by dialing 988, and additional resources will be available in the show notes of this episode. Now, let's get into the interview with Dr. Bullock and Dr. Anderson.
Hi, my name is Justin Bullock, and I am a guest host for the Docs with Disabilities podcast. And it is my indescribable honor to have Dr. Chase Anderson here with us on the Docs with Disabilities podcast. And I just want to start off with having you introduce yourself.
First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Chase Thaddeus Maceo Anderson. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist at UCSF and an assistant professor. I recently graduated from fellowship here at UCSF and was fortunate enough and lucky enough to stay on as a faculty member. I'm really honored to be with all of you today and to be with you, Justin.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with Dr. Anderson, first, he's a very deep, close friend of mine. He has been an enormously powerful advocate for social justice and really for people bringing their true, authentic selves to medicine in many different forms. He's well known on Twitter, so if you're on Med Twitter, you likely are aware of him, but also has written in a wide variety of contexts, which we'll talk about as we go through today. So I'm just really proud of him as a person and excited to get to talk with him.
Thank you. I'm just being with you is a dream because you know how much I love you and our life story together. So I'm excited.
And also for context for the audience, Chase and I first met in college. So we've known each other for many, many years. My first question for you is, what aspects of yourself are you the most proud of?
I love that you started with that. When you sent me the questions, I was like, dang, we're going there. I was like, don't you know we are Black and gay? We have imposter syndrome. We don't talk about ourselves. But the thing that I am most proud of actually came from friends saying it over the years. Friends from MIT, something that you have said actually too. It is that no matter what has happened in my life, I still have and maintain an open heart. And that is the thing that I value the most and treasure the most. Justin, you know, when I first got to college, there were issues around a fraternity and discrimination, and then restarting a fraternity. There have been other instances of discrimination in medical school and residency and having to deal with that. And even before then, when I was a young kid, issues around being African American and gay in America in a system that is not built for us. And one thing that you said that stood out to me, and I always remember, is you said, all of those events have just revealed more of who you truly are and who you are at your core self. And I hold that. I hold that from my friends. I hold that as something that is valuable. In a world that can make people hard, I have been fortunate enough and had privileges and had friends and had community that helped me remain open. So when I meet people still, I think about like, how do I share parts of my heart with this person? How do I help this person maybe heal a little bit more? How do I keep my heart open so I show other people that it's okay to keep their hearts open? You and other people were a huge part of me being able to do that. So that is the thing I'm most proud of, because I think that is something we're lacking in the world today. I think the world can make us hard. And so being open is truly a gift. And that's what I'm most proud of.
And where do you think that came from?
One of those people was you. Just to give you a huge shout out, you helped me keep my heart open. So just for background for everybody, in college, Justin and I had a group of friends and we actually called them the Muses. Or, well, I came up with that nickname because I was a fantasy nerd. But those people are people who each have a word that represents them. And that word is what they represent to other people. Like there's a friend called Love who taught me how to love again and be open and be loving with other people. There's a friend called Confidence who taught me to be confident in being a Black gay person in America. When I got to college, I actually was very damaged in some ways. To be very open and honest, I had gone through one suicide attempt already. And I was going to have a second one at the very beginning of college because of some issues around a fraternity at the time. And what happened was MIT friends and college friends were very much like, we know you have gone through things. We have also gone through things. We're going to share that with you. And we see more in you. We see the person you could be. You could be somebody who is hurting and hurts others. You could be somebody who is hurting and closes off. Or you can be somebody who is hurting and helps others heal. There's this whole adage of like, hurt people. And I think for some of the time in high school, I didn't hurt people on purpose, but I was very like guarded in a lot of ways. And then being at college with you and other people in the Muses, it was like, what if there's a different way? What if like you can go through hurt and then work to maybe make sure other people don't go through that same hurt? Because you now have the privilege and you have that experience. So you know what it can go like for people. You know that you can end up being in the shower and being suicidal daily. So if you're going through that, what if there was a way that you could keep your heart open and share about your experiences? So maybe somebody else feels not only seen, but knows I can get through this too. And I think as time has gone on, especially in med school and residency and then fellowship, and as I get older, our world is sad in a lot of ways. And I just want to bring a little bit more joy to it. And I want people to recognize that keeping your heart open keeps this like magic in the world almost. When we were in college, being with you, Justin, was magic in a lot of ways. And so I want to bring that to other people. So I think you all inspired that. And also my family in a lot of ways of setting me up for success and giving me the tools and opportunities that have gotten me to where I am. So why not leverage all of that to help other people?
I was thinking about apologizing to the audience for all of the love that they're going to feel, but then I thought that that's silly.
No apologies.
Exactly. Because it's very real, and Chase, obviously, that you've been a big mentor for me and brother, friend, everything throughout the time that we've known each other, and have really been someone who's responsible for a lot of healing for me. I want to thank you for your authenticity and the fact that you're being very open about a lot of the struggles that you've had. And I will definitely dig into those. But one thing I want to ask, when I hear you talk, I see the way that you move through different identities very seamlessly. And I guess I want to hear you speak a little bit about, what does intersectionality mean to you? What do you think about buckets of your identity? How do you think about identity for yourself?
I think that's such a good question because I think it talks about a lot of things in America. When I was younger, I remember when people would be like, he's that Black guy or he's that gay guy. And I was like, rude. And I was like, you don't know me. You're doing it based on what you see. And so in my articles and things like that, I think you've seen this progression in some ways. At first, I was like, oh, I'm African American and I'm more than gay. Now I take those labels and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take them and I'm going to make them really phenomenally flawless and fuck everybody else who hates those labels and is trying to use them against me. But I actually envision a day that we move beyond labels, and we can get into that a little bit more. But in intersectionality, the way I view it is, it's almost like, we'll talk about some of the pieces later, like the Scientific American piece, but I view it as different faces we put on in a lot of ways. Those faces are core pieces of who we are that we display outward in some ways. So yes, I am gay. Yes, I am Black. I am also far more than that. It's just people kind of pigeonhole me into those things sometimes. So I take them and I use them to my advantage and I embrace them. But I'm also sitting with you as somebody who you and others have called me a unicorn phoenix because I am this little unicorn trying to go through life and chilling on my own, and people bother me, and I'm like, no, we're going to set some fires and we're going to rise above this shit. And so I identify actually more with that label, but I also identify as a nerd. I read fantasy books. I identify as a psychiatrist. And so intersectionality to me is a way in which you can move through the world and you can wear different faces for different people. One of the things I have to be careful of is, am I wearing this face for other people? Am I wearing it for myself? Is it becoming my true face in a way that I don't want it to be? And I think intersectionality is this really beautiful thing that in society and even in a lot of articles, we see intersectionality as a bad thing. When you hear about it, you hear about somebody who is African American and gay gets 2 hits almost in America because you can get called the N-word, you can get called all these other things that are racially biased. You can also get called all these things that are homophobic. And some of the research I'm doing with mentors who are really wonderful is we're starting to look at, how is intersectionality protective? How can it be a beautiful support system for people? You and I are both Black and gay, and we get to interact in a way that nobody else can know our language in some ways. We have our own secret codes about things. And I have a code with you because of some of the psychiatry stuff we've gone through or some of the things we did in college. I think that's what intersectionality can really be too, is not just the detrimental parts, but also the very beautiful parts of, these are extra pieces to somebody that can enhance who they are and create this whole person who is a tapestry in some ways.
I want to jump into your writing, and I want to start with your unbelievable, amazing New England Journal Medicine piece, Taking Back Our Voices, #Humanity is Our Lane. And first, I would love if you just introed for the audience what this piece was, why you wrote it, And then if it's okay, I would like you to read an excerpt so that the audience can hear your piece in your words.
Okay. So this piece came about because of you, actually. I'm just going to put that out there. It's not just you, but you were part of inspiring this piece. You had written your piece, which I share with everybody. And when people were like, who do I read? And I'm like, Justin, because it's good as shit. And I remember seeing you publish that piece, and I wasn't at UCSF with you, or I wasn't at fellowship yet with you. But I remember reading your piece, and I was like, this is somebody I've known for a lifetime, and here are pieces I didn't know fully in some ways. And you know me, I like dig into shit about people's lives because I'm like, we're going to do the full story. And there were even pieces there that I was like, this is so brave and beautiful. And maybe you can do it too. The other thing that was happening at the time was one of my co-residents at the time in residency, Jack Turbin, who you know, and like, I love him. He was like, you write so well. I was like, I've never been published. And he's like, you should publish this piece. And I was like, it's garbage. It keeps getting rejected. And he was like, let's edit it. And then like, we will get it out there. And I was like, no. And so then like, it was years when he was telling me to do this. And then, so actually Black Lives Matter, which had already been in our like forefront of our consciousness, but like came into the consciousness of like America and the world because George Floyd died. I remember I felt very stifled. I was like, I need to do something. I need to first, because I'm a psychiatrist, sit with these emotions. But the other thing was I was like, I need to write. Writing is cathartic to me. Like I'm not using my voice in the way I should. I'm in this residency and I'm stifled and I'm dying. And so I actually took a 4-hour walk I was listening to K-pop in my playlist of 3,000 songs. And I sat down at a soccer field. I used to play soccer when I was a kid, been through college, and it just felt right. And I started crying and I was like, oh, all your emotions are coming out. And I was like, you need to do this piece. And so then I worked with Jack, and he helped me edit it. And we also worked with Suzanne Coven, who works at my university that I worked at for residency. And we edited it and then got it into the New England Journal. At the time, I was like, I got to leave this residency because like they're going to come for me. Like I was like, oh, I can't do it under a pseudonym, so I got to get out of here. But it felt like it was time. I had done a couple other pieces, one under my own name and one under a pseudonym at the time. And I was also, we'll talk about this later, but I was on Twitter under a pseudonym. And I was like, this is also taking back your voice. Humanity is your lane. So like, you're going to get some blowback, but it's time. So that's how that piece came about. I felt like it was time. And I felt like if I didn't do it, I was going to miss an opportunity to leverage my privilege. If my voice was damaged before, during residency it shattered. I was now terrified every time I tried to speak up. If students and residents who identify as minorities experience heartrending discrimination in their own institutions, how are they supposed to find their voice? How can they advocate for themselves and for their patients if they are continually told by their own universities to stay in their lane? But though the current statistics paint a bleak picture, there is hope. The hallowed halls of medicine may be whitewashed, but they're not the only halls that exist. Twitter, for example, offers an open platform allowing people whose voices have been stifled to get their message out.
So this is a great place to start with Twitter, where you were formerly known as Casey Ardham. I want to know why you were on Twitter under a pseudonym and the process of coming out, what that was like.
I also love that you call it a coming out because that's what it felt like. It felt like another coming out when we did the reveal. I also love that you knew the whole time. You were like, I know who this girl is. Like, I know what she's doing. I was like, I'm so
Rainbow unicorn, Phoenix. You're just like, okay, this is kind of obvious.
I love when friends were like, how did your residency not know? And I was like, I don't know. to go back, this was now almost 3 years ago, but I was in residency. I was in my last year because for child fellowship, you can leave your residency early. So fast track is what it's called. And I had already decided I was leaving. Residency was very difficult for me. There were days that I was suicidal every couple minutes, I would say. And still performing and doing well. But I was you are losing the best parts of yourself to medicine. This place is supposed to be a place of healing. You were promised that when you came here that they would support Black and gay people, that they hadn't heard of issues with Black people. And I was you should have known better when they said that. But I remember being if you don't start using your voice, It was not just your voice is going to die. It was you are going to die. If you don't start talking, if you don't start letting some of this internal screaming out, you're going to die. And so this is where Jack comes into play again. Huge shout out. He is one of the best white allies I've had. But I remember he had been for years since residency started, and we were this place is messy. He was you need to be on Twitter because there are Black doctors there. There are gay doctors there. There are doctors who are different and are struggling too. And you can find a place where you're seen. And I was Twitter's messy. I was you have told me how many fights you get in on Twitter. And I was I'm a pacifist. You know this, Justin. I was why the hell would I step into a place that's a mess? I don't have to fix messes. I don't want to go into this sphere where people are being mean to each other or saying you're not doing enough without knowing anything about the person. So I had always held off. And I also held off because I was if somebody figures out who I am, how much more trouble am I going to get in? And then Jack was what if you had a pseudonym? And I was ooh, I do love a secret mission like Sailor Moon. And I was yes, girl, let's do it. So in November, I think it was 2019, it's been a while, but we picked Salem the cat as my avatar because we were okay, you're not intentionally a shit stirrer, but just you showing up as Black and gay sets people off for some random reason. They lose their goddamn minds. They're he's smart, Black, and gay. I'm having a cognitive distortion. So I was okay, we're gonna do the Salem the cat with stirring a pot in a cauldron. And then the background is Sailor Moon because she holds up this thing. It's her silver crystal. And Sailor Moon is very much me too. And Salem the cat, Sailor Moon, she wants to save the world. She just wants people to be peaceful and loving. And I was that's your platform. These two pictures represent you. And all her enemies are around her in the picture and they're trying to steal her shine. And I was I want people to know that it's okay to hold their shine and it's okay to radiate because people will try to take their shine, especially minoritized people. People try to take your shine as you go through life. So I was very intentional about how we did it all. And then I just started tweeting. And the thing that I loved was I got to connect with doctors who were gay. We set up with Carl Street as well as Jessica Hallam, we set up a mentoring program that spans the world where healthcare workers were united with healthcare trainees and they have mentors now. Just because some people felt so alone at their university. We got to do cool things of we do roll calls and stuff. I haven't done those as much since I came back to Twitter after a break, but Twitter was this place where I got to be anonymous, but I also got to start sharing how much what I was going through. And the thing that I noticed immediately was other people were going through the same thing. I always knew that my story is not unique. That's something I really want to stress is my story as a Black gay male is not unique. There are pieces that are unique. However, there are so many people. If I'm sharing the story, there are thousands of people, millions of people going through the same thing in certain ways of being minoritized in America. But I just started seeing how people were struggling, people were hurting. And I was like, what if we could use Twitter as a way to connect a little bit more, a place to be like a little bit kinder, create a sphere of kindness. Obviously, I'm not perfect at it. Like everybody has missteps. Everybody has points where it's like harder. But being under that pseudonym, I got to do what I wanted to do in medicine, which was say, people in medicine are struggling. What if we could be kinder to each other? What if we could create a little bit more magic for everybody? And then as time went on, things started catching. And when I first started doing Twitter, I was like, if you do this right, people might come for you. If you do this right, people might hate what you're saying. You might make enemies. And like, you know me, Justin, like you've seen me through my career. I've only just wanted to make friends with limits, obviously. But I think then I went through residency. Nobody found out. And Jack and some other people at my residency knew, and other friends who were outside of medicine. And then I was walking in the streets of SF because I had just moved here for fellowship. And I was like, it's time. Like, it's time. I hadn't started fellowship yet, but I was like, I want to be myself when I enter fellowship. I want to be who I am. I want to reveal myself, because the pressure of the secret was actually a big thing for me. So actually, Jessica Hallam was really instrumental. And she was like, everything you've written in Twitter, nobody can come after you for, as of right now, if you reveal yourself. I was like, hopefully UCSF won't be mad. But then I did reveal myself. And I remember when I first met with my program director for our one-on-one meeting, and this was in fellowship, and she was like, I've seen your Twitter. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And like, because I'd also once I revealed myself, I was like, oh yeah, here's some shirtless pictures. Here's like, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm still going to pop the hell off. And she was like, no, I don't want you to apologize. I want to say thank you because you're so brave. And I was like, oh, I got the right university finally. Like, it took me like so long in medicine.
I want to ask a sort of personal question in there. So you're someone who has, by very objective measures, an outstanding academic pedigree, which shouldn't matter, but in medicine,
it does.
Care. Yeah, exactly. People care about a lot. I want to hear about your journey of deciding to leave places. And for the audience listening, how does one find where to go? If they want to leave and find something new, how do you know where to go?
I think you are pointing out something that most people haven't asked about what it feels like. I don't talk about this much, and there's only one article I think that talks about it, and it's like, it is right to leave, is what it's called. Leaving is one of the most painful things for me. I am at peace with it now, and I think I'm also at peace with it because I went through fellowship and now I'm faculty at the same place because it was so wonderful. When I've left other places, not college and grad school, because I left because I was going off to med school. That was different. That was like choice to leave in a way that I was like, I'm going to come back and it's okay to go explore for a little bit because I felt like I was in a good place. When I left med school and residency, it broke my heart a little bit because I might get a little emotional with this. So if I do, like, it's just going to happen. When I left med school, I remember being class president, and at the end of those 4 years, I was like, I can't do anymore. There was a point where some of my classmates, one of them was like, you were one of the most empathic people I know. And I was like, I am dying here. Like, I am taking care of you all and I have nothing left. And I didn't know I could reach that point. There was a point where one classmate, without even saying hi, was like, oh, I need this from you. And this was in my 4th year, and then walked me home, talked about themselves the whole way, talked to me for an hour in the lobby of like where I lived, and then didn't ask anything about how I was. And I remember sitting there, I was like, oh, I know how to solve this situation without actually engaging around it really. And that was the first time I felt burnout, like empathy burnout. I was like, I have nothing left. And I remember when things first started happening in med school, at first I was like, I can fix it. I can fix what's going on with administration. I can find allies. I can like make it like MIT. I can make it a better place. I can make medicine a better place that's more magical. It was a little narcissistic on some level to think I had that much power. But I remember being like, if you and I, Justin, can exist at a college where overall people wanted to be good people and wanted to change the world, medicine of all places should be that. But then I would say when things started really going, about 6 months into med school, I was like, I need to figure out how to get out of here. And so I was like plotting my escape, which then means sometimes you can't fully engage. And I got to a point in medical school where I was like, I don't have enough. I am not enough. And that hurt too. And me being just a person who wanted kindness in medicine was not enough to shift the things we needed to. Not to say things didn't change, not to say I didn't find allies. One of the Vice-Deans from there is one of my best friends, and we still keep in contact. And every time I write an article, she's like, I'm so proud of you. And like, at first I thought I was going to get sued by all these like universities. And she's like, thank you for doing this because we knew things were bad, but this is important. But leaving those places was one of those tough decisions because like in Chicago, where I was for med school, I put down roots. I came back to Boston for adult psychiatry residency. And I remember I was like, I'm coming home finally. I am back with my friends who I love, who have changed my life and saved my life. I'm never going to leave Boston. And about a year into residency, I was like, I will not survive. So the way I knew that it was time to leave was with all the pushing that I was doing. If a university wasn't changing and with all the pushing I was doing with other people, and fortunate to have allies who were helping me, if that was not enough to shift a place, what would happen if I was there for 20 more years? Would it move enough that I could be happy? Would it move enough that I would feel valued and respected? And when that branch point comes up, like that's a very personal choice for every person. And I was scared, like, what if I go one more place and it's not right? Am I just not right for medicine? Can Black and gay people exist in medicine? And then I remember interviewing it where I am for faculty now. And during the conversation, I was like, take the conversation for interviewing out of these people's hands because they don't know how to answer things about what discrimination is like here sometimes. I remember I flipped the question and was like, what are specific things of discrimination that have happened here and how were they dealt with? That was one of the most telling things for any interview I've ever done. And where I am now, answered the question the best and followed through with it when I got here. So that kind of portended how things were going to go. Whereas like I had other places where they were like, we haven't heard of any issues with racism here. And I was like, what? I was here for like residency. You're telling me this for fellowship at the same place? Come on. So it's a very personal decision. And it's one that after I leave, I always have moments after where I reflect, what if I didn't do enough? I think it's something we do as minoritized people. We're taught that like it's our fault. And so it's a personal decision. And that's how I came to those decisions of if I keep giving of myself, I'm not going to make it. And what is going to actually shift this place? It's not you. So go somewhere where you can be in a place where you're safe and then can poke at other things, but have that safety.
I want to return to a piece that you mentioned earlier, The Mask We Wear to Survive.
Yeah.
Which is your piece in Scientific American, where you talk about shadow chase. Who is shadow chase? And what does this concept of minority stress have to do with shadow chase, if at all?
Yeah. So there's this modality in psychiatry called internal family systems. And so the idea is that everybody has a core self. So like for everybody listening, Justin knows that my nickname is Dream because like I hope to foster people's dreams and like help with dreams and hold dreams. And that was my muse nickname. That's like my core self. But then you apparently, when you go through trauma, when you go through discrimination, you have these other pieces that you force your emotions into that sometimes come out. It's not dissociative identity disorder where you don't know what you're doing, but it's a little bit similar to that. So shadow chase is one of 4 different versions of myself that can come out. Justin's also seen the other versions, but there's like fantasy Chase where like I'm like, everything's great. Let's live our best lives. Everything will be okay. There's Snow Chase where I'm more calculating about how I do things to get through. There's also Warrior Chase where I will defend other people and have my shields for everybody else, but I don't defend myself because these are defense mechanisms basically in psychiatry. Shadow Chase is the darkest version of myself. And that's where I apparently, when I went to therapy, like everybody should go to therapy, but that's where I shoved the anger and the depression and the suicidality because I needed to compartmentalize basically to get through the day. I don't think people recognize how much, like Justin, you and I have talked about this, to get out the door as a minoritized person, to get to work and smile is sometimes overwhelming. So I needed a way to like do that. And so Shadow Chase was one of those versions where I would shove some of those emotions there so I didn't have to deal with them right then. And minority stress, that's where I shoved those things. Like when I would hear the N-word, when I would get called like stupid, or I was told that I was there because of affirmative action, or I would get called like homophobic slurs. I shoved all the rage and anger into Shadow Chase basically. And the way I think about it is Shadow Chase is the saddest part of myself because that's the part that needs the most love and needs to be like let out. And that's what therapy did, was like rewove all those pieces together. So I sit with you as my core self, and I haven't used those like masks in a lot of way in a long time because I feel safe and I know how to integrate those aspects now. I love you smiling. It's so great.
Yeah, I wish. Too bad. I'm sorry the audience can't see my smiles. I'm just really basking in this. I want to hear about whether or not you had fear when you came where you ended up now, where you have stayed since fellowship. Is it hard to exist as green face?
I'm terrified. I don't think we talk enough about the fear that every minoritized person feels when they try to be activists. I have friends who have gotten death threats. I have like written articles and been called the N-word on them, like online in a very public way, or like told that I'm garbage, or like told that I don't care about people. What can happen is being your core self, it grounds you, but it also leaves you vulnerable in some ways. And I think you have taught me this and taught me to be this way. You were part of this. You taught me to be so empathic. And so I feel for every person. Even when somebody like calls me the N-word, I'm like, oh, let's think about where they came from and why they are saying this and how we can maybe do better. Other people would be like, fuck off. Like, go away. You're trash. But I don't think that way. I think maybe there's something that happened in this person's life that got them to where they are, that they're enacting their own pain towards others or jealousy or whatever. So being myself grounds me, but it does scare me in a lot of ways. I think you know me. I just want to be going through life making friends with everybody. I want us to have that Star Trek future, but we only get there through vulnerability, and some people aren't there yet. So I am terrified every day, but I think that terror lessens as time goes on. I have a program director at my university who dealt with things so I didn't have to around racism with certain people. I have like friends like you who inspire me and refill my cup every day. I do these things because you and I and other friends promised each other once upon a time, let's be our best selves, even though we know it's going to be painful in some ways. Maybe we can create ripples that help other people. So yes, always scared, but I think it lessens as you go along.
I personally know you very much as a writer, and know you when you started as a fantasy writer. I want to know, what piece of writing are you the most proud of and why?
Oof. So you already mentioned it, actually. It's the Scientific American piece. When we did it, it actually was a totally different article at first. It was like about just medicine and like my experiences in it and like having to get through a day. That was it. I was working with an amazing editor at the time. and he tried to get it through, and it got to the last stage where they were like proof editing it, and they were like, oh, we can't publish this because this university might get mad. And I was like, yo, I just like published this piece in NEJM that like, if we got through that and I haven't gotten sued yet, I think we're okay. But I understood the fear behind it and why. And so then I actually was like, hey, so in this piece, there's this little one-liner about like, I wear different faces. And I was like, what if we made that the whole article and brought in this fantasy aspect, because that's how I think, because it will show that physicians are not just about medicine. I'm a fantasy writer. That is my favorite piece because we brought fantasy elements into medicine and we brought fantasy elements into mental health, and we did it in a way that was understandable to other people, not just fantasy writers. It took a while because like even when we were editing it, he was like, what the hell are you talking about? I was like, okay, I need to make this a little bit more normal than your like fantasy versions of stuff. But the piece also was super meaningful to me because I had seen you actually talk about your suicidality so openly. And I remember I calculated when I was going to pull that out in a piece. And that was one of my 5th or 6th pieces. And I was walking everybody down through like, okay, here's racism and homophobia. Here's how it affects other people. Here's how it affects me. Here's how it affects people's mental health. By the way, I'm suicidal sometimes. Like, but you had just like gone out there and done it. I was like, okay, like he still has a job. I can do it too. Like I was like, And so that piece pulled together so many things that I think showed me as an actual person. That's why it's my favorite, because it took the most work, but it was one of my favorites because of the fantasy and revealing my true self in a way. I felt like that piece is the one where I truly found my voice, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a question that I'm often asked from people is like, how did I know it was going to be okay, that I wasn't going to get in trouble if I wrote these things? And I think the whole point is like that I'm hearing from you too is like you don't know. You hope that you won't, but also when you write the truth, it is the truth. And if you stand behind that, there may be consequences, but I wonder if you would echo, but for me, it is this thing of, this is a truth that I have to get out and I'm willing to bear the consequences. I hope there aren't any.
Yes. The way you said that, that's beautiful. That resonates with my heart. I don't think sometimes people appreciate the risk that minoritized people take to be their true, authentic selves. Justin, you have done these absolutely stunningly beautiful pieces of work, and you do each of them at risk. And every time you've done one, I have seen you embrace your power a little bit more. And you doing that lets other people embrace their power a little bit more. So like you set a very good tone for the rest of us as writers too, of power through vulnerability. And you're right. Every time I write a piece, I'm like, is this the one where I get fired? like I remember at the beginning, I was reaching out to my program director being like, oh, so you wrote this thing, like, am I going to get in trouble? And she's like, how do we get it out there more? And I was like, oh, why are you saying this? It's a trap. And I remember, like, I don't know how you feel, but online, like, posting things there, I was like, over 99% of it is great, usually. And then that 1%, you're like, is this when they come for me and the trolls find me? Like, we always are worried about the traps, but the benefits and the way that hopefully it helps other people embrace their truths outweighs it.
And now that you're Chase, the attending child psychiatrist, I want to know what you have learned in your journey of caring for folks who have maybe sometimes or all the time, like lead disabling conditions.
Yeah.
What lessons have impacted you?
I love this question. I think a couple things. The first is to set limits. We are very unboundaried as a society. Sometimes there are people on Twitter going after other people in a way that seems so unboundaried to me. And I think we are a very unboundaried society in a lot of ways because there's so much pain. And a lot of people aren't going to therapy because, first of all, we can't find enough therapists. And second of all, finding therapists who like are within insurance and yada, yada, yada. But what you can see is people are in pain. And so they enact that pain towards others. And so that also happens sometimes when I'm with patients. It's usually not the kids. It's usually sometimes parents who are like so distressed for their kid and they don't know how to help their kid, that then it comes out as like, I need this now. And sometimes you have to slow that down a little bit. And with parents and with other people and just in my own life, psychiatry has been so good with learning how to set boundaries. You can set boundaries with kindness. It's not that I don't love any of these people at all or that I love them any less. Me setting boundaries means like I care about you enough to set boundaries so we can continue working together. And it also means I recognize you might be a little unboundaried right now around some things, which shows a sign of distress. So let's get to that. The other thing that I've learned is, and this is something I think you saw in college too and in grad school, the power of the story. We short shrift that a lot. Even in medicine, it's like you get what you need in that moment, and we miss a lot of pieces about who a person is and maybe why they have the diseases they have, because we're trying to fix the downstream problem. Hearing somebody's story of how they got here, it helps that person with catharsis because they can get things out, and it helps you fully understand them. So when they react a certain way, it gives you context. The other thing about hearing people's stories and what I've learned is like sharing your story is healing. There's so many kids. I show up as this Black gay psychiatrist who also like sometimes has like dyed hair, and kids are just like, oh, this guy's being himself. And he's like this 33-year-old guy. Maybe I can do that too. Like I've had kids who are like, Chase, I have to tell you something. I'm like, I knew it was coming. And they'll come out. It's the cutest thing ever. They're always so secretive about it. They're always like, Chase, I just was wondering, can we talk? And I'm like, yeah, we can talk. And then they're like, okay. And I'm like, yeah. It's like, it's so cute. Mm-hmm. And like, you get to see how those kids like sharing their truths changes their life. Like, yes, it's going to sometimes be hard conversations with parents. It's going to be figuring out what is being LGBTQ plus means to them. But they're on a journey that's faster and earlier than I am. I think the other thing that I've really learned from patients is everybody really wants a better world. I think that deep down, I don't think everybody knows how to get there. And sometimes they don't have the tools to get there. And I think a lot of misunderstanding comes because we don't know each other's lingo. We don't understand where our biases come from. We don't examine those biases. And being with those kids, it reminds me that people want a nice life. And so those kids keep inspiring me all the time. That let's be kinder. Set limits, but be kinder.
And have you found that how have people responded to your learning to set boundaries?
Online or in my real life or like in...
Let's go real life.
Okay. I think most people respond really well. I have had people say, thank you for telling me that. I have had sometimes people who come up and they're like, oh my God, can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? I'm like, let's maybe like slow it down. First, hi, like, how's your day going? And they're like, oh my God, you're right. Like, I didn't even recognize that and I'm like, it just means that you're like probably like stressed right now in some ways. And that's okay. And I think there's a little bit of like, you have to have some grace with that. Cause like, I could just be like, girl, you didn't even say hi, I'm done. But I think it's an opportunity because then I've seen actually people remember that when they interact not only with me again, but with other people. And I think that creates a softening in some ways. There are some people who don't react to my boundaries well. And I take that as a sign of, hey, maybe we're just not at that point yet where we should be interacting in some ways, or maybe we need to shift the boundaries or explain these boundaries a little bit more, or I need to enforce them a little bit more. Does not mean I don't love that person. I think, again, you know me, my baseline level for everybody, even people I dislike their behaviors, I love everybody. But like sometimes maybe we just aren't meant to interact at that time. Doesn't mean that we won't in the future.
want to talk a little bit more about your mental health. My first question that I actually don't know the answer to is, do you identify as someone with a disability?
I don't, to be honest. I think there are people who do, and I am here for that. I empathize with people doing so, and I empathize with why. I personally don't feel that way, but I also wouldn't say that won't change as time goes on. For me, I haven't seen it as a disability. I've seen it more as almost a facet of myself. Like, it's just another piece. It's almost more like shadow chase in that mask aspect of like, this is a piece of me. And I think people who view it as a disability view it in the same way. So I think we're actually very aligned in that kind of way. I just have never termed it that. When people do, I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, let's keep rolling. Let's dive in. I love that you asked that.
Yeah. No, I think I had a different question. I was like, actually, I've never heard Chase sort of use that terminology to refer to himself. I think it is, just to sort of echo and think out loud, you shared with me in writing that you had times where you really struggled with your mental health, where you've been suicidal, where you've attempted suicide. And I think it just really nicely highlights the fact that we can't assume how people identify unless we ask them. So thank you for answering.
Oh my God, I love that you asked. I was like, yeah.
How do you stay well?
It's different for how I'm feeling and in different circumstances. So this is a nuanced question that people could write articles about, how every person who lives with mental illness, how they stay well in different moments, because it's going to change in different moments, and you have to adapt. Unfortunately, I wish there was a thing where I just did the same pattern and it always worked, but it doesn't. So when I'm well, when I am not depressed, when I haven't been triggered by something, when I don't have like the depression and the suicidality, for me, it vanishes. So one thing I've recognized about myself as time has gone on is my depression is usually triggered by social circumstances. If I'm hearing racism, or like I'm seeing racism like by proxy trauma, or I'm hearing things on the news that are really damaging to people and I feel like I'm not doing enough, if I'm experiencing things directly, if I hear friends are going through things, that's usually how that sets it off for me, especially the minority stress aspect. But when that doesn't go on, or when I feel safe, my depression and suicidality vanish completely. You lived with me. I actually remember this distinctly. When I left college and took a break before grad school, and the depression had vanished right before then, and I came back and I started interacting with you all, and you were like, you're so different. It's like, yeah, I'm not fucking depressed. Like, I'm not thinking about killing myself. It really changes your outlook on things. You're not in survival mode. But I always like giggle about that, but it's a drastic difference. But in terms of staying well during that moment, I just live my day. And I'm like, oh my God, do I have a full set of serotonin right now? Is this what other people are feeling like? It's great. When I feel like things are getting a little bit harder and I can feel the depression coming on, mine does not show up like the stereotypical, like my energy goes down or anything like that. Mine is different. It shows up as I start having nightmares usually first. My sleep fragments. It doesn't go down necessarily, like I get the same amount of hours, but it fragments where I'm having nightmares and waking up screaming and crying and stuff. And then I get anxious too. Those are like some of the first things. When that happens, I'm like, I have to think to myself to stay well. Do I have a therapist? How do I take care of my patients during this time? And for my patients, I usually have permutations of these are all the things I need to do with their meds. These are the things I need to do with their life. These are the things that I remember about their life that we need to work on and like that they want to work on. So I start running the like XYZ, and then I also move into A, B, and C, because I know for myself, I never want my patient care to be impacted, and it hasn't been because I have those permutations that I run. So like snow chase, I guess, would come out a little bit, but I know that I'm doing that now.
Something that I know that you also do that relates to you being a psychiatrist too, that you have yet to talk about. So I just want to invite you to answer one more thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm I'm saying you take meds.
Oh, yeah, I was going to get there.
Oh, sorry. I'm like, he hasn't said it yet.
No, I pop them pills. I take my meds. Even when I'm well, I take them every day. I know it's an important part of my process, and maybe I don't need them anymore. Who the hell knows? Because I'm in medicine, because I'm in America, which is racist and homophobic, I'm just putting your pillars. Keep that pillar because it's not affecting you. Your cognition is probably better with it. And I don't have side effects, which is different for me. And I know some patients have side effects, which is why you should talk to your physician if you're having side effects, because our job is to help you around that. But for me, I don't get side effects. So I'm just I can take this when I'm well too. And if something starts happening, it'll hold me enough to give me enough of a gap and a pause where I can get other things in play. So that's also part of when I notice things going down. Other thing is if I start noticing I'm having depressive symptoms or something happens, I'm also do you have a therapist? And that's a hugely important part. The other thing is I tell friends, you've been there. When I took my break from being online, I was I'm letting you know. And I let other people know. I was I am having suicidality. I'm having this. But I tell specific people who have seen me go through this, who know what my danger points are. And I've never been hospitalized because I have all my permutations and I have been able to get out of those periods. But I know letting friends know and letting my family know, they will also recognize things that I might not be able to see at that point. So if my patient care ever changed, people say when I am depressed, my patient care is actually even super, super on point because of my permutations. I'm wait, what? But you all know me well enough that I have a select group of friends who, when things get worse, I let them know. And when I'm really bad, I pull out the big guns in some ways. It's not just meds. It's not just therapy. It's not just the permutations. But it's making sure I go for walks, making sure I do this, that, and the other, making sure I listen to K-pop, making sure I take my alone time as well. Because sometimes I get depressed because I'm hearing all this stuff about racism and homophobia, or my patients are going through things, and I don't process it as much. And I still try to socialize instead of taking my alone space to purge it a little bit. Those are some of my tools and stuff. Here are if you have other questions about that.
My last question for you is, to everyone listening, I want to know what advice you would give to anyone who may share in any of the identities that you mentioned, may know people who hold some of the identities that you mentioned. What advice would you give?
You almost made me cry a little bit with that question in a very good way. I think it goes back to our muses thing. For everybody listening, Justin and I were talking a little bit about his nickname a little bit right before. His nickname is Peace. And so since mine is Dream, I think what I would want listeners to know is it's okay to dream a little bit more. I think we've lost some of that in our society of why are we not thinking about that Star Trek future? Why are we not mad that we're not on spaceships with Beyonce and casually running across her when she has a concert in space? Why are we not focusing on getting there? I think we're so bogged down because of what's happening in society for very real things. We should be past racism. It's a mess. Come on. We should be past debating people's rights and things like that. We should be seeing the stars and having our little Sailor Moon future and things like that. And so I want listeners to share in these identities, and people who share in these identities in different ways, or share in marginalized identities, or just people with identities, which is everybody. It's okay to dream. It's okay to dream of a better future where we are kinder and more loving and more openly magical with each other, and want to know everybody's story when we first meet them, and want to know how people got to where they are. And it's okay to start acting on that. I think we're stymieing ourselves sometimes because we have systems that are oppressing us. And let's dream of what our world could be beyond all of this. Let's work together to make that happen. And also that you're not alone in that dreaming. There are like millions of people right now who are sitting in their homes being like, what if we could have a kinder world? So you're not by yourself as we go through this dream together.
I wrote a little something for you at the end that I want to read to you.
Oh my God.
Chase, as I watch you fearlessly fight for justice, for all of us to dream, as I watch how you create a medicine which has space for me, for my authentic self, I think of your voice, which echoes off the mountaintop. And I'm reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last speech. He said, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anyone. I have so much love for you. I'm so grateful that I got to bask in your glory and wisdom, and I hope people find meaning in this.
I love you a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Bullock, for opening this conversation up to us and our listeners, and for sharing the wisdom and care that you've cultivated on your paths in medicine. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, this is the second of a 3-part continuation of our series highlighting BIPOC disabled folks in medicine. If you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to subscribe to our podcast, check out our previous interviews, and tune in again next time. This podcast is the production of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative and is supported by a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, with additional support from the Stanford Medicine Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity and the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Family Medicine and Disability Initiative. The opinions on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, their respective institutions, or the funders. This podcast is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivative License. This episode was produced by Lisa Meeks, Sophia Schlossman, and Nicole Kim, with support from our audio editor, Jacob Feeman.